Hello everyone and welcome to another lesson on the nature poetry from the EduCast anthology. The reason why I'm doing this is not for you to do your homework, it's not a set homework. I've had a couple of requests from students who had asked me to actually put some more lessons on just to help them annotate the poems in the anthology. So there will be more to come, but I thought I would keep it on the theme of nature. This picture here, I want you to take a look at it. Now, some of you will have seen this already because I have shown it in class before. But for those of you who don't, I do like to show this because it's a really, really interesting image. It is to do with nature, but I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, perhaps a minute, just to have a look at it and see what you think. So I'm going to speak in about 30 seconds, but you can put me on pause here. As I always say, if you really want to have a look at it, because the longer you look at a painting, the more that you will see certain things in that image. Okay. Right, so like I said before, you can put me on pause here if you want to, but just a couple of observations from this picture. You've got the idea here, you've got the idea of nature on the left, and it's represented by a female, so you could interpret that as being Mother Nature, because we always refer to nature as being Mother Nature, this thing that nurtures us, this thing that's everlasting. And you've also got here on the right hand side, you've got a hand which probably represents mankind, and you've got this gun that is pointing at Mother Nature. But if you look closely, you can actually see what is actually in the image of the gun. So you can see there's a city landscape and it looks heavily polluted. Look at the colours on the screen. It's really, really dark and foggy. It's almost like smog is coming away from that gun. It's almost as if we as humans we're killing nature, which we are killing nature, but we do need nature. But what we have to consider here is which is stronger. Are we stronger than nature, or is nature all powerful? It's quite interesting as well, because I know that some of my students, before, when they look closely at it, you can see the waterfall that's coming down across her face, this idea that it's tears, the damage that's being caused to nature. But look in that picture, she is dominating the picture, she is bigger, she is overlooking the gun. And also, if you do notice, look at the hand of the man, well, I presume it's a man in this case. It's all charred and burnt. So by destroying nature, actually it's destroying us in turn, because we do need nature. But I'm not going to go on too long about that one. But the whole idea with this one is the fact that a lot of the poets in this collection of poems that we've got in the anthology, they do get across the idea that nature is all powerful, and we know that already from hawk roosting, which is represented by the bird. And we've also got Heaney's poem as well, Death of a Naturalist, where he realises that nature is all powerful and makes us feel a certain way. It does actually control our feelings and controls our emotions. Okay, so again, you can look at that as long as you like. It's a really, really great picture. Right, so just to recap some of the lessons that I've done before, I have gone through the list with you. Now, what I've done this time is I've actually readjusted the list, because the reason being, right at the top are the ones that are most obvious, the nature poems in the anthology. So if you were to go into an exam and you were to think, right, I need to think about a nature poem, then you would think about these ones at the top. So Death of a Naturalist, that is a nature poem. Hawk Roosting, we've got To Autumn, which we've not done yet, but I will do a video for that one. And we've also got Excerpt from the Prelude by Wordsworth, and again I will send a video for that one. I've put here Ozymandias, which you might have guessed already is the poem of today, considering the background. You can just about see the statue of Ozymandias in the background. Now, the reason why that is a little bit lower on the list is because it's not about nature all encompassing the poem. There's other elements in this poem as well. I'm going to discuss that today, but if you wanted to actually write about nature in this poem, there's some really, really good quotes you could use. And the beauty of Ozymandias, there's not too much to choose from. Whereas the others, there's so much you can say about it, and you have so little time to be able to do that as well. And at the bottom, I've actually mentioned the soldier and Mamet's wood, but they really do, in particular, focus more on war, the theme of war. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a collection of poems based on the war theme, and I will include the soldier and Mamet's wood within that, and it'll be a crossover into nature. Okay, just so you know where I'm going with this one. Right then, so as always, we need to be prepared. So we are going to be doing Ozymandias by by Shelley, and it's on page 19 of your anthology. Make sure that you've got a highlighter or highlighters ready. You might want some paper, but there's quite a bit of space around the poem. Make sure that you have read the poem first. That is useful. I will read it with you, but it's good to have a good understanding of it first. And then just to remind you, which is what I said last time, this guide, the poetry guide, is excellent, a CGP. If you can invest in that one, that is really, really useful. But that said, and I've said this before, please don't take everything this says as your interpretation, because you might not see it in the same way. Remember, these are people's interpretations of the poem. Okay, on the right hand side there you have him there, Percy by Shelley, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Alright, so just so you know where we're going with this one, so far what we've done is we've actually just looked at language and structure with the recent poems that we did, which is AO2, but today I'm also going to talk about contextual influences, which is AO3. So band 3, so the top 3 bands we've got here is that you can make accurate comments about language and structure using subject terminology, and you can also refer to some context and its importance. That's band 3. Band 4, I can analyse the use of language and structure using accurate subject terminology. I can be confident about referring to contextual influences in connection with the poem. So again, when we get to the context, I will talk to you about that, about only really taking something that is relevant, that is actually relevant to the poem that you are studying. There is no point you telling us everything you know about the poet if it's got no relevance to the poem itself. And band 5, right at the top there. This is if it's a 15-mark question, by the way. We know there's 2 lots of questions, a 15-mark one, and the comparison is the 25-mark question. I can confidently analyse and be perceptive about the use of language and structure using accurate subject terminology. And again, that's that word perceptive again. You know, this idea that having an interpretation, being able to sustain it, having an alternative interpretation. I can make sophisticated connections to contextual references and their significance in relation to the poem. And again, taking that little bit deeper, can you sustain that discussion all the way through? Is there a significance to Shelley's background, his influences, and how is it coming through in the poem? Right, so context, AO3. So Percy by Shelley. We've got to think about here what's the most important information as well, because again, just what I said just previously, you don't need to say everything you know about Shelley, but quite a few things that I've got together here has quite an influence on what he's writing about in many of his poems, and in particular Ozymandias. So Shelley was a poet from the Romantic era. Now these were, if you don't know this, you probably know this from lessons anyway, but as a collective, they often wrote about nature, freedom and the supernatural. He was born in 1792 and he died in 1822, aged just 29, when his yacht was caught in a storm off the coast of Italy, and he is buried in Rome. His second wife, Mary Shelley, was the author of Frankenstein. Now you might wonder what that's got to do with his writing. It would have influenced him greatly because, of course, Frankenstein is about the supernatural. It is about the idea that, you know, can we create something that's powerful, that's more powerful than man? And, of course, it all backfires in the novel. A great book if you ever want to get a hold of it. He was an atheist and he disliked anyone in power who abused it, especially the church and government. He didn't believe in violence or war, and he didn't like King George III, who was the monarch at the time, and because he was involved in lots of military action, in particular with America at the time, American independence. And Shelley disliked social injustice, and he hated the oppression of the lower classes. So very much an advocate of anyone who was oppressed, any lower classes. And you know, quite a few of the poets that we do study, like William Blake, you know, novelists like Dickens, they were very much on the side of the lower classes, and a lot of their writing deals with these issues as well. And he wrote Ozymandias when he heard that a statue of a Greek ruler, Ramesses II, was coming to the British Museum, and that's it. That's what he did. He just heard that the statue was coming, and he must have imagined what this great ruler must have been like at one time, because this statue is huge. If you ever get a chance to go and see it at the British Museum, it's free to get in London, and it's not far from the entrance actually. So you could just go in, have a look at it, and you can go out again if you're not interested in the rest of it. Okay, I just wanted to show you this as well, really, because only because it's quite close to here where this painting is. Now, this painting is by Fournier, Louis Edward Fournier, and it can be seen in the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. Now, what it depicts is the funeral of Shelley on a beach in Italy, attended by 3 of his closest friends. Now, one of them was Lord Byron, who wrote another of our poems in the anthology She Walks in Beauty. So he was also a romantic poet as well. The thing with this painting is it's really fascinating, and that's why I showed you this, because the fact that it is in the Walker Art Gallery, and it had quite an influence on me, because the Walker Art Gallery, if you don't know it at all, it's free to get in, and quite often when you're in Liverpool city centre, quite often a lot of people go and it's raining. So when I was younger growing up, if it was raining, we'd either go into the museum or we go into the Walker Art Gallery, because it was free. And of course this painting has been there for many, many years. And you can just see there in the left hand corner, sort of towards the top on her knees, I think that is supposed to depict Mary Shelley, I think. But it's quite an evocative painting to see. But there you go, you can kind of see it in context there. Right then, so let's get on to the poem. Ozymandias. Right, so who was he? So let's just have a little think. So Ozymandias is the poem that we're going to have a look at, and it is a sonnet, which I will talk to you about as well. And it was written by Shelley in 1817. Now it is based, like I said before, on this Egyptian pharaoh called Ramesses II. Apologies there, I think there's a spelling mistake there. And this pharaoh was a hugely powerful tyrant and ordered a statue of himself to be made so he could be immortal. On this statue he had the words inscribed, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." He believed himself to be godlike and indestructible. Now, here in brackets what I've put is, and I got this information from somebody else, even though I have seen the TV series, I've put here a bit like Walter White. So if any of you know the TV series Breaking Bad, then in that the character of Walter White almost becomes like Ozymandias. He almost thinks that he's indestructible, and he thinks that he can overpower anything by his intelligence that he's got, the things that he's able to do. He thinks he's untouchable. And of course, over time, we do know that time and nature is more powerful than even the strongest man, and time does catch up with Walter White in the end. And there's a nice little phrase for you there: pride comes before a fall. And just one thing as well to say to you, there's lots and lots of information on this poem because it is a very famous poem. There's a really, really good short documentary, Poetry Between the Lines, which talks about this idea of Shelley as romantic poet, and the idea of where he got the actual idea of Ozymandias from. And there's the presenter there, you might recognise him. Right, so I did want to talk to you about the idea that this is a sonnet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through with you the actual sonnet itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about why we think it's written in sonnet form. Okay, before we do though, just notice there that it is actually a Petrarchan sonnet, so that is 14 lines, and Some of you know by now, okay, that each line is what we call iambic pentameter. So that is 10 syllables per line, and you have an ABAB rhyme scheme, and that makes up what we call a sonnet. And as we know, a sonnet, okay, is normally written for love, and you normally send it, well, we don't now, okay, unfortunately, it's quite sad. But years and years ago, it was the way of communicating to someone that you love or someone you want to fall in love with, or you want to fall in love with you. You would write them as sonnets. And Shakespeare was very, very well known for these as well. So let's have a little look through the poem. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Okay, and there you go, actually. That is Ramesses II, who is in, at this very moment in time, in the British Museum, and has been there since the time that Shelley was actually writing. And remember, that is not Ozymandias, that just influenced Shelley to write about this great tyrant, this great pharaoh, though he doesn't look very tyrannical there, does he really? He is huge though, it's a very, very big statue. And it's quite interesting as well because the idea that people are immortalised in work. So with art and literature, so if you really, really want to be remembered for the rest, you know, after your death, then you would have a painting made of you. If you were rich and famous, that is, you're a great leader. So quite often, you go to London, you go to Liverpool City Centre, Manchester, there are statues of famous people everywhere you go. And they were, that's the reason why they were built, so you could be remembered in the future. So if anyone ever does a painting of you, you know that you'll be remembered forever. If you're ever a character in a book or an inspiration for someone to write in a book, there you go. As soon as someone reads that, you are immortalised in print. What a nice thing to think about. And then before, I did actually say to you about this idea that why did Shelley write it in a sonnet? Well, the thing is, he wasn't saying that he loved this person. So perhaps he's being quite ironic here, and he's telling us that it's the statue, it's the pharaoh that was so in love with his self-importance that Shelley decides to use a sonnet to show that, to give that idea. Okay, it's quite interesting, that isn't the way he's chosen his form in structure in which to do that. Okay, so back to this then. So we know that I use this phrase tip and slip, and again, I know some of you who might be watching this, I've got a different English teacher, and you might think, no, we don't use that, but this was just something I came up with because, especially for the unseen poems that you'll get in the exam. So if you can think about these things that are in the poem, you will get the meaning and you will get to the analysis of the poem. So it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You put the ingredients together and you will get to the big picture. So don't forget, we always look at the title at the beginning. The titles are really, really important. Personal pronouns. So, the narrative voice. So whose voice is it written in? Is it the poet? Is it somebody else? Who are they writing to? Are there any positive words and phrases? What about things like negative words and phrases? Structure, rhyme, pace, repetition, language, and punctuation. Sorry everyone, I had to just get a drink then. Right, so let's have a look at the title. So, Right, let's have a look at Ozymandias. So Ozymandias then, if you were to break it down, it would actually tell us something about what it means. Let's just have a quick look. So Ozy means to breathe, and Mandius means to rule. So the idea that, while this pharaoh, or this tyrant was living and breathing, he was ruling over his land. So maybe by creating a statue of himself, he felt that he could carry on doing that and remind people of this great tyrant and ruler that he was. But maybe Shelley's telling us here that actually, you know what, you don't rule. You do not rule when you're no longer breathing. So the two things go together. As long as you're breathing, you can rule. Obviously, if you're a pharaoh or a king. So it's quite interesting that he actually uses this as well, isn't it? All right, so here, now, assessment objective 1, which I'm not really focusing on so much today, even though we do need to know what the poem is about. This is really useful because to get an understanding of the poem before you go into the analysis is really useful for you, because they will actually, by you giving quotes and by you selecting relevant quotes, it's showing that you understand the poem. So these 10 statements here, have a little go. Do it in your own time. You can pause me, like I said before. You can actually pick out any evidence that you want to in your own time, but you will need to pause me. But what I will do is I'll go through the 10 first, and then I will reveal the answers. So again, before I reveal the answers, you might just want to press that pause button. Okay. Number 1, the statue is huge. Number 2, the statue has crumbled. Number 3, there is an absence of life. Number 4, the face is no longer handsome. Number 5, this ruler was arrogant and powerful. Number 6, he tormented his people. Number 7, he was once superior. Number 8, he believed he was the greatest of all. Number 9, nature has destroyed this great ruler. And number 10, he is now a lonely figure who has been forgotten. It's quite nice, those statements, because it kind of tells you the story of what's happening in the actual poem. So again, look for the evidence. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. It's just looking to see that you understand what the poem's about. There may be another piece of evidence that I've not chosen that you might say, well, I think that one is better. The way that I've done it, I have tried to do it in the order in the poem as well, just to make it that little bit easier for you, because I wanted to tell the story throughout those 10 statements. Right, everyone, put me on pause, because I am now, going to reveal the answers to you, but it's up to you. You can just do this with me if you want. Okay, the statue is huge. So the word vast, it means huge. The statue is crumbled, trunkless legs of stone, so there's only the legs left, and the top half of his body is missing, it's crumbled. Absence of life, so the desert, so they stand in the desert. The face is no longer handsome, so a shattered visage, because visage is another word for face. This ruler was arrogant and powerful, sneer of cold command. He tormented his people, the hand that mocked them and the hand that fed. So what I'll do here is I will give you some information a bit about that language that's being used. He was once superior, so he's placed on a pedestal. He believed he was the greatest of all. Look on my works. Nothing beside remains, is that nature has destroyed this great ruler, and he's now a lonely figure who has been forgotten. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Right, let us analyse the language. So I'm going to go through what I always do with you. You can do it along with me. You can have a go first if you want to, but I have split the sonnet into sections just so it's a little bit easier to annotate and to understand. Right, off we go. First of all then, I've picked out the word traveller and also antique. So I met a traveller. So the narrator has only heard about this story. The narrator's not experienced it, the narrator's not seen it. This king or pharaoh is legendary. So in other words, does he really exist? Does it really exist? That's a question we should ask, isn't it? And the poet is also, right at the beginning, detaching himself from this, as if to say, I don't approve of this type of thing. This is someone who is telling me this story and I'm relating it back to you. And the idea that it's from an antique land. So this traveller's come from an antique land. It's not very important anymore. The idea that, you know, it's rusted away, it's got no significance, or it's got no use anymore. And I know we could look at antique as being something that's got value, but I think in this context we need to be careful that it's used in the right way, okay, but what he means. So it's old, no significance, it's not really of any consequence to anyone, really. So the vast and trunkless legs of stone as well, there's a real emphasis on size here. Think of synonyms here. So the idea that, you know, the word vast can mean enormous, massive, immeasurable. You know, this really, really important figure, remember, that it was so big, it was almost out of control, you could say. Yeah, however, the statue is incomplete and broken. So it might be immeasurable, it might be huge in his lifetime, but now it's been destroyed and it's been broken. And it's been broken over time, it's been broken by nature as well over time. So the idea of they stand in the desert, so the connotations of desert, that feeling of isolation, you know, left behind and abandoned, the word deserted, so nobody cares, left to the destruction of time and weather. Again, something's controlling the statue. So this pharaoh, this tyrant that felt that he was in control of everyone, now is nothing, is crumbled in the desert, left alone. And, you know, this idea that half sunk, you can just about see it there in the sort of the dark blue. So slipping away, some of this half sunk into the sand, not proud anymore. You're not standing there for everyone seeing. I think that statue of Ramesses II in the British Museum, look how proud he looks on that. But look now, it's actually, the face is actually in the sand. Remember, Ramesses II is not Ozymandias, okay? It's just that it influenced Shelley to tell this story of what these people might have been like at one time. And the idea that a shattered visage, so the face again, which we mentioned before, didn't we? So physically broken, no one is there to mend it. It's in the desert, isn't it? It's been deserted. And it may also metaphorically refer to emotions. So he is shattered now. That dream that he had to be immortal and to be in everyone's memories. And remember what I said before, Shelley, as the narrator in this poem, this is quite confusing, had never heard of this person, never heard this tyrant until the traveller told him about it. So this is what I'm saying to you, is that this tyrant, this pharaoh, is of no importance anymore. He has been shattered by something that's all the more powerful than he is. Right, so let's just have a quick look at this. Sorry, it's just gone over the writing there, but it does say sneer of cold command. So the idea of wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. It's quite negative language to describe the harshness of the face that's lying in the sand. You can still see the features. The alliteration highlights the cruelty of this pharaoh, so that cold command. He must have behaved in a very cold and calculated manner, and the idea that his features still show that shows that that's what he's left behind, the harshness of what he was like as a person. This bit here is quite interesting because it talks about the sculptor, and there's been quite a few interpretations about this one, but just have a quick look at what it says. It says, "It sculptor well those passions red, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things." So this sculptor perhaps was chosen for his expertise and enthusiasm. That's quite often was the case. So if you were famous, you would always think about who would sculpt you or who would paint you. You want someone who was the best at what they did. He has captured the features well, and they're still very distinctive. So you can see that sneer still on the face and the wrinkled lip that he's got. This would have been very important for the pharaoh, like I said before. And also it's quite interesting as well because as an artist himself, Shelley, perhaps Shelley was recognising that this is true talent. To be able to build something like this is an amazing feat, really. But the idea this sculptor was very enthusiastic, and the reason why I say that is because it's got that idea, the passion in his work that created this huge statue of the pharaoh. And then here, this line, and again, this one has also had a couple of interpretations. One of it being, so the idea of mocked. So when you mock someone, you are tormenting them, you are making a fool out of them, you're teasing them, that type of thing. Some people feel here that it's the sculptor who was mocking the statue or the pharaoh, whereas I'm not so sure, because I think that what he's done is he's probably built this statue exactly how the pharaoh wants to look, this intimidating way. And the way that I see it, the way I see this line is, it's almost suggesting here it's about the pharaoh, it's not about the sculptor. So the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. So it's suggesting here that the pharaoh tormented his people. He mocked them and he treated them with contempt, yet he fed them to keep them in line. So this idea that he kept them coming, so the idea to keep your followers following you is to give them the most primary need that they do need, and that is to feed them, to give them food, to keep them going, and then they would rely on him. But also as well, that idea of the word fed can also be a metaphor. It's quite ambiguous in the fact that he may have fed them lies, he may have told them lies to gain that power. So, really, really kind of manipulating character. You could take that from that line if you wanted to. But also as well, I think Shelley's making a comment here about his dislike of authority, because this is what authoritarians do. People in the church, people in the government. Remember, this is what Shelley thought at the time, because people in the church at that time, they did abuse their power. And don't forget, anyone who's done Dickens will also know that Dickens made that comment as well. And if you read the poem London, William Blake is also making that comment about the church abusing its power. And these romantic poets were really set against that, because the people that lost out over this were the common people, the lower classes, because they had no one to get them out of that situation. And that's almost exactly what is happening here in the time of this pharaoh, the fact that he kept his followers oppressed. Okay. So on the pedestal and the pedestal and King of Kings. So this is a symbolism of superiority. If you ever want to show anybody up on high, and even when you read Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is up on high when Romeo looks up to her, even though I know it wasn't originally intended that way by Shakespeare, but it's the idea that Romeo puts her on a pedestal to show that, she's beautiful, she's celestial. It can also be used as well to show a sense of superiority with a pedestal, which is why a lot of statues are built on these mounts. So the idea to place someone on high, to lord over everyone, that phrase goes, and also the use of hyperbolic language, King of Kings. And it's interesting here that this phrase reminds us of Christ, because Christ is known as King of Kings, to suggest that he was a godlike figure, or proclaimed to be a godlike figure, almost bigger than God. And here, the use of the personal pronoun, again, always look out for those pronouns. The use of my, my, look on my works, my name is. Very self-centred, egotistical, self-importance. And this imperative tone as well. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. He is telling people what to do, to look at him, okay, because he is all important. And its arrogance is actually highlighted here as well, because it's almost, he calls them mighty. Now, it could be that he challenged other leaders, look at me, I'm greater than you. But notice the capital letter as well, though. And it's very unusual that you have words with capital letters unless it's being personified, but also referring to God. So he's almost saying, look at me, God, I'm greater than you. Okay. And that's quite often as well, it's quite interesting that when you look at things to do with nature in poetry, when nature is all powerful, that is also capital letters are actually used there as well. And the idea of exclamatives are used, despair, it's forceful, it's powerful, but also think about the connotations of despair here as well. That word despair in the time, the 18th, 19th century, it did actually mean hell, and it did mean like a hell-like existence. So what's happening here, the use of mighty and despair, you've got the idea of juxtaposition. So you've got something that's godlike, yet you've also got something that's hell-like as well. It's almost like he rules over all extremes, and he creates that existence amongst others as well. But his great statue will be a reminder that if people are not ruled by him, they'll be lost of all hope. So this idea of being in despair means that you do lose all hope as well. And he had the power to be able to do that. And again, don't forget, this is Shelley's interpretation. This is what he's imagining this person must have been like. So here, right at the end, we do have a slight change of tone as well in the poem. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. Look at those words: remains, decay, wreck, bare. The semantic field suggests that no man can exist forever. Do you remember we talked about semantic field, about words that have got something in common, words that have a theme running throughout them? So this idea of decay. So no man can exist forever. Nature has eroded the statue. It is ruined by its arrogance that it could withstand time. So he felt that he would last forever. But why on earth would you actually build something in a desert with that extreme weather that would just, and the wind that would just rot away, you know, because it is only made of stone at the end of the day, you know? And this here, the colossal wreck, it's almost an oxymoronic phrase. It's almost two opposites. So I know you can have a huge wreck, I know that, but the idea that a wreck is something that is falling apart, yet colossal is something that's massive and something you almost look up to. So something that was once grand here and majestic has now been destroyed. And I think that's kind of using those two words together shows that in the poem. And right at the end here, look at the use of alliteration here, lone and level. The emphasis, you know, it does really emphasise the feeling of empty space in the surrounding desert. And it almost goes on forever, and it's almost as if no one can see the statue anymore. This great king that was revered by others, looked up to by others, is now alone and isolated and out of reach of anyone. So nobody wants anymore. All right, so just to kind of finish the analysis, and always never forgetting about structure, because it's really important. And in fact, if anything, you could probably talk quite a lot about structure in these poems. So we said before, it's a sonnet form, and it is normally associated with love. And this pharaoh was in love with his own importance. Quite simple, really. However, so I didn't say this before, but it doesn't actually follow a regular rhyme scheme as a true sonnet does, which reflects the fact that human power and structures can be destroyed by greater forces, and the greater forces in this being time and nature. There is also a volta. Now some of you know what that is because we talked about it before. That just means the turning point in the poem on line 9 that shows the ruler's arrogance was so great and unrealistic that the consequences of his ignorance, not realising that nature can destroy, actually destroyed him. So if you go back and have a look at your poem again and just have a look at how it suddenly just shifts in the tone, what Shelley does. So Shelley's almost saying, well, this really, you know, if you're gonna behave like this in life, if you're gonna think that you are almighty over everyone, then really this is what's going to happen to you, or what should happen to you. The structure of the poem builds up an image that focuses on different parts of the statue and then ends with the enormous desert, which helps to sum up the statue's insignificance in comparison to nature, i.e. the desert. And also as well, and I did tell you this before about the story that, you know, it's written by, well, it's a narrator, which we're assuming is Shelley here, which we must always never assume this, but it's Shelley's ideas coming through, and it's told through a traveller, so it's a second-hand account. It's in his mind temporarily, so someone tells you a story and it's a story. So his existence, so the pharaoh's existence to Shelley was insignificant compared to the passing of time and the greater force of nature. So this pharaoh who wants to last forever is, as the story is told bit by bit, will eventually fade away. When we realise that actually the moral of the story is it's not about how great he was, it's actually about the forces of time and nature. Right, everyone, so that leaves me, okay, to say goodbye. And not that I put myself in a pedestal, but I quite like this, thought it was quite good. There's me amongst the pigeons in the park. Really, that was nice to go to the park at this moment in time. But I will put a new poem on soon for you, and it will be in the nature collection. But anything that you want to ask me, you can get in touch with me by email at english@the-academy at thegrangeacademy.co.uk, or you can do it via show my homework. Okay, bye everyone, see you next time.